Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. So you would have heard recently in the news, Paris Olympics organisers apologises to Christians for the Last Supper parody. So what happened was it was blatantly obvious an attack against Christianity where they undermined the Last Supper at the Paris Olympics, the opening ceremony. It was atrocious, where they ridiculed religion, where they promoted transgender and LGBTIQ and turned it into a whole big political stunt. So let's see what someone said. So Leonard Kane says, so they should. This tacky, tasteless opening ceremony had nothing to do with sport. It insulted billions of people around the world. I'm guessing he's talking about the Christians. Now, my response to that was, the West clearly still hurt over Qatar, FIFA World Cup, 2022 World Cup. Imagine the insecurities that they had to go full-blown LGBTIQ, transgender and anti-religion in the opening ceremony in a majority Christian nation. And we know that they're hurt because Qatar said, we're not going to have LGBTIQ, we're not going to have their flags promoted and symbolized in a majority Muslim country. And that's a lot of the things that a lot of the Westerners do now, right? A lot of the Westerners say, we don't want Islamic symbols in the West. We don't want the burqa, we don't want the niqab, we don't want the hijab, we don't want your mosques because this is the Islamic symbols. It's Islamization of the West, and we don't want this. And Qatar is saying, hey man, okay, well, we don't want the LGBTI flag. We don't want this because we want to preserve our religious and conservative ideals. Now, you may be turning around and saying, oh, but isn't that a hypocrisy? Isn't that a hypocrisy, Mustafa? Because, you're coming and living in Australia or in the West where you have the freedom to live and practice your religion and so forth. So then why aren't you then condemning Qatar? Because Qatar should also allow LGBTIQ. I'll tell you why it's not hypocrisy on my part, but it's more hypocritical on your part, because you believe in secular liberal democracy, whereas the Muslim nations don't believe in that. If they did, then yes, it would be hypocritical if they didn't allow LGBTIQ and so forth in their countries, but they're not that. But you say you're liberal and democratic and so forth and all for human rights. So if you ban religious symbols, then you're the hypocrite because you claim to give those sorts of freedoms. So anyway, getting back on the point, this is their aggression and hatred. France planned literally 2 years at their aggression to Qatar. But they don't like to talk about that in the media. They don't like to say, well, we did it because of Qatar. They know they're doing it because of Qatar. They are so upset that their disgusting immoral behavior wasn't accepted in a Muslim country. And so they went full blown in their own country, to the extent to even insult their own Christian populations. Paul Edward then responds back by saying, to be honest, Qatar working hundreds of migrant workers to death and funding Hamas were the main reason to dislike the event. That's what he said. My response to him is, but no one complained how America was built, slave trade, colonialism, or is there a double standard? Where is the same condemnation of the US government funding the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Palestinian people? Paul then writes back and says, so the actions of colonial Americans extending a very well-established African slave trade, which still exists in Mali today, is the only excuse you can offer in defense of funding terrorism, homophobia, misogyny, and working migrant labor to death. I wouldn't apply the Oxford Debating Society anytime soon. My response: let me guess, if you condemn all forms of human rights abuses, do you still plan to travel to the US? Do you still highly admire the achievements of the West? Since they evolved and got ahead in life on the back of the slave trade, the United States empire was built using slave workers. I'm guessing all those human rights abuses are forgotten because it advanced the West to what it is today. In fact, what the West did was much worse, hardly even a comparison to what Qatar did. But Qatar is evil. Qatar is human rights abusers, right? You can't handle Qatar because it holds onto conservative principles and it forbids the disgusting moral values of the West, such as man on man, women on women, men who don't even know if they are a woman, men who say they are women and use a female bathroom. Yes, of course, it's all misogyny and homophobia, but we should accept Islamophobia when you don't allow human rights, such as many Sharia things that are not accepted in the West. For example, polygamy or the burqa, which is banned in France. For example, I don't see you complain about Islamophobia and human rights abuses. What about the human rights abuses objecting to LGBTIQ, where you get your job cancelled and sponsors dropped, and you are forbidden to represent one's country in the national sport? That's exactly what happened to a rugby player in Australia. Is that not a form of human rights abuse? So Qatar cannot go against human rights, but you can punish people for not agreeing to LGBTIQ, and you call yourself human rights defenders. It seems your human right is only a right if it conflates to the moral compass of the West. If not, then you have no right and get punished for it. And then Craig, another person, comes in and says, it's not really a double standard when we have modernized over the last 50 or 100 years. He's trying to basically say, we don't have slaves, we don't have this, we don't have that. And I said, it really hasn't. You still pay 30% of your income tax to stay out of prison. And then he writes back 30%. He says 14.5%, buddy, and that's for public services and medical coverage. I'm not American. I replied back by saying, bullshit, public services. Most of that money is going into the hands of the rich to sponsor their lavish dinners and parties while throwing the public peanuts. People are still dying. Emergency awards in the United States, they're dying there because they don't have proper health care. You are not American, but we are discussing America, which you guys don't have an issue with. And also saying you are evolved doesn't make the past crimes go away. That's like saying you will forgive Qatar 100 years from now on, so long as they progress. Well, perhaps they will progress once they build their empire on the back of the blood, sweat, and tears of migrant workers. So give them a chance to progress, shall we?